Today's video is just a regular wrap-up. I'm going to say what I read in January. To start, I read Phantom by Susan Kay. This book, it was my everything. I rated it 5 stars on Goodreads. I have been obsessed with the Phantom of the Opera since, I saw it a long time ago, but I recently got obsessed again a couple months ago, and so one of my goals for this year is to get through every single adaptation of the story. I started this year off by reading Phantom by Susan Kay, which follows the Phantom's full life story from childhood to death. Next, I read The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I did not like this book like people said I would. It was boring. The synopsis was kind of like, okay, well, I'll read it. But then I read it and I was like, oh, okay. So I was bored. But at the end of the novel, it got a lot more interesting. So overall, I rated it 3 stars. I liked it. It wasn't that great. But I still planned on reading the rest of the series. And I was like, okay, well, I bought it. Oh, well. I don't usually buy books before I read them, but I did this time, so sucks for me. Next, I read The Dream Thieves, the sequel to The Raven Boys, which I loved a lot more. I rated it 4 stars on Goodreads, either 4 or 5, I can't remember, but I really liked the dynamic between Ronan Lynch and Joseph Kavinsky. For a small moment, I shipped them. Please don't get on me about this, but yes, I shipped them. I don't ship them anymore, of course, for many reasons, spoilers involved, so I'm not going to go on. So this book got a lot more into Ronan's character, who was seen as just kind of a mean bully in book 1, and I really liked that. He was actually a more interesting character than what I had expected. After that, I read Blue Lily, Lily Blue by Maggie Stiefvater, the sequel to The Dream Thieves. Can I just say something about this cover? Amazing! This story, the story of, in the Raven cycle, of the 4 Raven boys that the main character Blue meets in the beginning, develops even further. They go on more adventures. It's great. I also rated this book 5 stars. Finally, I read The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. Great. And I also rated this book 5 stars. Finally, I read The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater, the final book in the Raven cycle, and another beautiful cover. I rated this book 5 stars. It was an epic finale. It made me cry several times, I think, and I was so impressed by how much Stiefvater's writing had improved since book 1. Book 1 was published in 2012, while this book was published in 2016. So that's 4 years, maybe even 5 if you count 2012 and 2016. During that time, I was listening to Sadie by Courtney Summers on audiobook. So this follows this girl. Her sister was killed, and she's out for revenge. And there's also this podcaster looking for her. So we follow the podcast, and we read from Sadie's perspective. So I listened to the audiobook, which was very, very hyped on BookTube all throughout last year, and I was amazed. It lived up to the hype, basically. The audiobook made it so much more relatable. The main character, Sadie, has a stutter, and I think I was able to get through the book more clearly since I was listening to it than if I was reading. It's hard for me to read a stutter. The voices, too. Everything was really good. It was a full cast, and it had the podcast. So overall, that really gave the full depth experience. Next, I read Oedipus, the King by Sophocles. I'm trying this thing where I read 1 classic book each month at least, hopefully more than that, because I want to catch up on my classics. That was one of my reading goals for this year. And I knew the story. Of course, I had learned about it in my drama class, but it was just a lot. For those of you who don't know what the story is about, Oedipus is a king whose mom was prophesied that her son would kill his father and marry his mother. Now, Oedipus does not know this. I don't really feel like any of this is spoilers because this is such an old book that I feel like everyone knows the story. It's like Shakespeare. Everyone knows the story of Hamlet, right? So Oedipus is the king. He does not know that he is married to his mother and that he killed his father because he was raised far away from the palace. And when he finally finds out, a lot of stuff happens. There's a lot of suicide and gouging of eyes, and I just feel bad for the poor dude. Like, this was a very interesting book. Oh, by the way, I rated Oedipus 4 stars. I also read The Rules of Magic by Alice Hoffman. This book is a magical realism book talking about witches in the 60s. It was a very character-driven story, which I'm usually not drawn to. It was all right. I felt like it was very repetitive. It was witch here, witch there. So I had never heard of this book before, picking it up randomly over one weekend that I just saw it on a shelf and I read it. But then I saw a lot about it after I had read it. That always happens, right? You find out about something, and then once you find out about it, you find that it's been popular the whole time. So that was how it was for me for this book. And I think it's overhyped. It wasn't that great. It was so repetitive, talking about witches the whole time. I just kind of felt like, okay, half of this book could just not exist and I'd still get the same content. I rated it 3 stars on Goodreads. Next, I read A Girl Like That by Tenez Bettina. And that is another thriller, contemporary-ish story that follows a girl who is kind of seen as the bad girl in her school. And a lot of girls gossip about her. She dates a lot of boys. This is kind of everyone's view about her. And when she is found dead on the side of the road with a boy, there's a lot of questions that happen. And so it basically goes to the beginning of the story and progresses to see how it got to that point, which I really like. I really like when authors tell you what happened and then how you got there, which is what happened in this book. I rated it 4 stars. After that, I read Dreadnought by April Daniels. This one is about a trans girl superhero who inherits a female body once she gets her superpowers, and she has to deal with both the struggle of being out to her parents, but also the regular struggles of a superhero and all-around prejudice that surrounds both of those things. It was a good book. I rated it 4 stars, but I feel like it was a bit rushed. I don't plan on reading the second book. I might get around to it eventually, but I think I'm just going to leave it where it is right now. And finally, in January, I read The Fangirl Life by Kathleen Smith. I myself am a fangirl. However, I did not relate to this book as much as I thought I would. I rated it 3 stars based solely on my personal enjoyment, really, and also writing style. I mean, it's a nonfiction book. I don't usually read nonfiction. This was mostly based for TV fangirls, so there was just a lot of stuff I didn't understand. It was interesting to get into the perspectives of people who really get into fangirling, but for me, to the extent of what happened in this book, I was just kind of like, whoa. There was a lot of things that it talked about, like obsessing over hair and girl crushes that you're not actually romantically in love with, you're just obsessed with them. And I guess I can sort of understand that, but it just wasn't as relatable as I thought it would be. That's what I read in January. I hope that you guys will check some of the books out. The Raven Cycle, I'm late to the game definitely by 3 years, but I got around to it. Overall, I had a pretty good reading month, rating 6 books 5 stars, and the rest 4 stars. Okay, forgot about one book, The Wicked King by Holly Black. This book is the second book in the Folk of the Air series, beginning with The Cruel Prince. The Wicked King was very twisty, so I liked it way better than the first book in the Folk of the Air series. The first book was described as what Jude, the main character, will do to attain power. The second book is described as what she will do to keep it. I think that is a very accurate description. I think that was said by Holly Black herself, and you definitely see the power struggle that goes on in this book. I love political fantasy, and I think that this is definitely one of my favorite political fantasy series out there. I definitely recommend you read The Cruel Prince. I understand that people either hated or loved this series. I loved this series. I do love this series. Queen of Nothing. That's kind of a spoiler in the title, but who am I to name the book? It's coming out next year, I'm pretty sure. I cannot wait to see what happens, because stuff happened in The Wicked King that was pretty dramatic. Holly Black has a knack for dropping bombs at the end of the book, so she did that with The Cruel Prince when the unexpected happened, and then she did that again with The Wicked King. The problem is the titles of her books. So The Wicked King, you could assume The Cruel Prince is The Wicked King, and you can assume The the Queen of Nothing is referring to the main character. Of course, we don't know if that's true, but the titles make the stories kind of predictable. So if there was one thing that I could change about that series, it would be that. But other than that, I love the series, and I definitely recommend you read it. Those were the books I read in January of 2019. I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye!